everybody, and welcome back to the Bay Bolts channel for this episode of Thunderstruck. We have a very, very special guest joining us for this one. I am thrilled to introduce him. As always, my name is Jake Ricker alongside my co-host, Michael Wax. So ladies and gentlemen, don't want to delay anymore. He has over 40 years of play-by-play experience. He has called games on ESPN, NBC, and many other prestigious networks. He spent 7 years with the Rochester Americans, 10 years with the Hartford Whalers, but most importantly, he was the voice of the Tampa Bay Lightning for 24 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Rick Peckham. Rick, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you, Jake and Michael, on a beautiful Friday and getting ready for the weekend.
Absolutely. Super excited for the game that we have coming up tonight. But when you guys are seeing us, that game will have already taken place. But let's jump right into this. Rick, to start things off, I want to talk about where you got started. So if you can, tell us a little about how you got interested in the broadcasting field and what really drove that passion for you to be a play-by-play announcer, or maybe there was something else that you wanted to do in the world of sports.
Well, I started actually in high school. There was an older student who had convinced the basketball coach that he could do play-by-play along with the coach's videos of the home basketball games that he used for coaching purposes. And that kind of started the ball rolling, developed into actually a little TV production. We got sponsors. I was able to jump in my junior year. And so I got a little on-air experience from that in high school in Kettering, Ohio. Went on to Kent State and got an opportunity to start broadcasting hockey, and thought that might be the path of least competition in terms of looking for a play-by-play job in the United States. And it worked out that way. Got some great experience at Kent State, and started out in the American Hockey League with Rochester, as you pointed out. And, it got a little frustrating, I'm sure you guys, you want to you're anxious, you want to get started and get opportunities, and you can get impatient a little bit at that point. But now looking back, it was 7 good years to get me started before I got to the NHL with Hartford in 1984.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear how you got started. In particular, you started out in the AHL with Rochester, and one of the things that we've seen from both the players that we've talked to, like Dan Milan, and the other broadcasters like Dave Randorf, is they talk about how the speed between the NHL and the AHL is different. Was there anything else when you were broadcasting that you really felt like was a huge difference between the different leagues that you called throughout your time in the booth?
Probably the size of the arenas. Hartford was one of the smaller ones, but and so many buildings, and as newer buildings came online through the years, the broadcasters get pushed higher and higher and farther away from the action. Back in those early days, I noticed, compared to the American Hockey League buildings, where you might typically have a capacity of 6,500, 7,500, now is about it. Madison Square Garden was really kind of a difficult place to work because you weren't so much high, but you were pushed way, way back. And so it was very hard to follow the action. You had to really adjust to the surroundings of the NHL instead of being right on top of the action as we were in the American League.
In Amalie Arena, I'm sure it was a huge step up too, because that's one of the state-of-the-art arenas compared to many of the other ones today. I want to talk about a little bit with your time with the Hartford Whalers. So that was one of your first NHL gigs, I believe, that you got with as a team play-by-play announcer. Can you tell me a little bit how you got involved with the Whalers?
Well, it was a very interesting story, really, because I had sent out some tapes in my later years in Rochester. The team got very successful. We won the Calder Cup championship in 1983, and locally, a couple of TV stations would pick up games, important games, playoff games, things like that. So I got some TV experience and was able to put a tape together, send that demo reel out to a few teams, and really didn't know for sure if these teams were even looking for an announcer, but I just wanted to make sure I covered my bases. Well, my wife, who was from Rochester, We'd been dating for about a year and a half. We got married in August of '84, and everything was pointing toward another season in Rochester. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I get a call from the Hartford Whalers during their training camp that they had an opening. And so here we are, a month into moving into a new apartment, newlyweds, and now I have to break the news to my wife, Vicki. Wow, we're packing up and we're moving to Hartford, Connecticut. So it was an interesting start, and it was difficult the first few months, just getting used to a lot of things with the NHL. But some great people with that organization helped me settle in, and things went pretty well.
Yeah, and you spent almost over a decade actually with the Whalers. And then I think what a lot of people know you for, though, especially in this area, is your 24 years here in Tampa. What came so intriguing to you with the Lightning organization? Uh, I know that when you came, Bobby the Chief Taylor was already here doing color commentary. What was the biggest draw to you into the Tampa Bay area?
Well, at the time with the Whalers, they had undergone an ownership change. Peter Carmanos, who would eventually move the team to Raleigh, North Carolina, the rumors about that move were pretty strong in Hartford at that point, and it sure looked to me like they were going to make that move. They had just bought the team in Hartford, but it just didn't seem like they were intent on keeping it there. And so we started to think about our future. My wife, Vicki, and I had two little boys. By the time we made the move to Tampa, they were 4 and 2 years old. So we had to think about our future. The network there, Sports Channel New England, based in the Boston area, was very fair with me about the whole situation, but there were no guarantees from the Whalers. So I started to look around. As it turned out, John Kelly, who now is currently doing the St. Louis Blues, has for a number of years, he was the original Lightning TV play-by-play guy. And Colorado just came online as the Quebec Nordiques had moved to Denver. And so there was a fierce battle among us to get that job. And John ended up getting it, creating the opening in Tampa Bay. I had a good friend from my old Rochester days, Jerry Helper, who was one of the executives who helped start the Lightning along with Phil Esposito. And so through Jerry's help, I ended up getting hired here in Tampa, and, really didn't know what I was getting into. I never had really envisioned living in Florida, growing up in Ohio and working in the Northeast. But here we were, and we made the move, and it has just worked out perfectly. We could not have hope for anything better with the way it unfolded over the next 24 years.
So just to sort of dissect one of the things you said a little bit, you mentioned that it was sort of this unstable ownership and the relocation rumors that really brought you to Tampa. And you stayed here for almost a quarter of a century. But Tampa's had their fair share of relocation rumors, especially in the late 90s and the late 2000s. What was it that really made you want to stay with this particular organization?
Well, there were some very rough years when I first came. The first year I did games, 95, 96, was the last year they played at Tropicana Field. It was known as Thunderdome back then. The Rays hadn't been created yet, but they made the playoffs that year. So it was all this excitement. The next year, the Ice Palace, now known as Amalie Arena, opened up, but the team really sunk. The Japanese ownership that brought the Lightning into the NHL, they wanted out. There was an owner who had it for less than 2 years. He sold it to Palace Sports from Detroit. And of course, a very solid professional organization that made the base for what turned out to be a Stanley Cup champion in '04. And we were settled here. It was so beautiful. Our family loved it. And I really felt like, these jobs don't come around that often. So I felt very fortunate to have this job, and just the fortunes of the organization changed. And as they did and got better, things got more secure for me. And I really felt a part of the situation here. I remember Chief and I, in kind of the bad old days, saying, geez, why doesn't this team get better? If you were a free agent, why wouldn't you want to come to Florida and wear flip-flops and shorts to practice every day instead of bundling up and having to shovel ice off your windshield after practice and after games? So eventually, obviously, it's turned into that situation where, free agents love coming here, as we've seen in the past few years. But I just felt a real part of the community here and felt that this was a secure place for us to be.
Well, we are so happy that you felt that way and were able to stick around with us for that long, because you're one of my personal favorite broadcasters. I know for a lot of Tampa Bay fans, they all feel the same way. And you mentioned the pitches. I think the Lightning have a pretty good pitch right now. Jet skis, beaches, and Stanley Cups. I mean, what more could you want? It's fantastic, and no state tax as well. So that's such a great pitch for the organization. It's great to see that they have hit their stride really recently and are playing some of their best hockey right now. But you have made so many calls over the years, and a lot of Lightning fans have their personal favorites. But I wanted to know, is there a call for you in particular that was one of your favorites that you enjoyed the most?
Well, I would have to say the last game that we did in the 04 playoff run, which was second round action, the Lightning ended up sweeping Montreal. And the last game that we did for the old Sunshine Network, now, of course, Fox Sports Sun, was game 3. And it ended in such dramatic fashion where the Lightning were trailing by a goal, face off in the Montreal zone. There's 25 seconds to go at the time of the face off. Well, the Lightning win the face off. There's a shot toward the net. Vinny Lecavalier is right out in front of the net, tips the puck through his legs as he deflects it past Jose Theodore to tie the game with 16 seconds to go. It goes to overtime, and Brad Richards wins it with the overtime winner skating behind the net, banks the puck off the goaltender Theodore into the net, and the Lightning win that game, go on to sweep the Canadiens. And I think that in particular, I kind of came out of my shoes on the call of that overtime winner, as well as the tire by Vinny. So I would have to say that that game would be the most memorable one in terms of actually calling goals.
Yeah, and in that championship DVD, they talked so much about how Vinny Lecavalier and Brad Richards were sort of the hometown kids, and those two dominated the series. And it's great to hear that your favorite call comes from Vinny and Brad. Unfortunately, I was really too young to really experience that firsthand, but hearing that call years later, one of the best calls you've ever made. Just being upfront with it. But one of the things that we talked to Dave Randorf about was being a passionate broadcaster, but possibly when you're working national games like he did for so long, not letting that get in the way of being, biased or complaining towards one team or the other. And he said that as a Lightning broadcaster, his goal was to be 65 to the Lightning, 35 to the opponents. When you were in the booth, how did you find a way to walk that fine line between the passion that you displayed and the criticism that you may lay on during a broadcast?
That's a great question, Michael, because that fine line keeps moving depending on how the game's going, depending on, leading up to that particular game, how the team's playing. Maybe they're in a losing streak and times are getting a little tense around the team where you don't, you got to kind of step gingerly around. And, not that they're really that sensitive to criticism, but you also have to be aware of your audience. If it's one thing I learned in broadcast school at Kent State, I had a professor, Dr. Weiser, John Weiser, and he was so instrumental in a lot of the basics that I was able to learn in my time at Kent State. One of them was know your audience. And of course, when we're on Fox Sports Sun, that audience is going to be 90% Lightning fans. So you're broadcasting for those people. What do they want to know about this matchup? What do they want to hear in terms of the exciting moments? And like Dave said, you're certainly leaning toward the Lightning on that. And if there's a spectacular play like Patrick Kane scores the other night for Chicago against the Lightning, and he is probably the odds-on MVP along with Andrei Vasilevsky in the entire league right now, with Connor McDavid, of course, Austin Matthews, but Kane, he's going to get overlooked, but he shouldn't. He's been that good. And so when you get a player of that caliber making a spectacular play, and he's been making them all year long, you're going to get really excited, even though he plays for the other team. So it's a matter of, I guess, experience comes into play where you just kind of weigh that moment, and you've got to decide how you're going to describe a certain play and how it unfolded. And that kind of dictates, how much you get excited, or, I don't mind leaning on these guys. The thing that bothered me, and still does when I watch the games at home, this team passes too much. They don't shoot enough. And so I don't mind jumping in there and whether it's with my voice or what I say, like, and he drops it, he doesn't shoot or something like that. I don't mind throwing that at him because they deserve it. But, you just have to know your audience and who you're broadcasting for.
I knew when you got upset with the referees that there was a bad call going on, that it was a really bad call, because you very rarely, you did such a good job of finding that fine line. But that was always, I always thought,
Jake, Chief always covered for me. I mean, he would blast them, and whatever I came in behind him with would always sound milder than what he was saying. So it always sounded like I wasn't blasting the officials, but we had a great partnership on that. That's for sure.
Well, there was one game in particular, it was last year against Boston, where, you're in the booth with Brian instead of Chief. So Brian's a little more subdued when it comes to the referees. And everybody, I was at the game, so I was seeing it firsthand. But I go online after, I think it's like the second intermission, everybody's like, Rick Peckham just went on after these referees, and he's really just tearing into them, and you don't see that all the time. And you know what that shows? That shows that, number one, Rick is passionate about the Lightning. Number two, these refs are doing a terrible job.
Well, it's funny because Brian, with all of his network experience, and the only time he's really broadcast for a team, he started out in radio with the LA Kings, and then got a job with ESPN, and then for a short time was doing Columbus games on TV. So he's so used to taking that middle road on calls, like, well, it's a tough call there. I don't know if I agree with that, but we got to move on. And he's absolutely right. You do have to move on. And it's amazing the restraint that the players and coaches show, while all of us get fired up about what we perceive to be a good call or a bad call. But he's kind of the opposite of Chief, so I can't hide behind Brian. So if I'm going to criticize the officials, it's really going to stick out. So occasionally I just felt it was warranted, but it's tough to contain your emotions sometimes, and that's always been a tough situation for me sometimes in doing the game.
So you just mentioned, Brian's approach is very different because he comes from that national background. And you were in the booth with Bobby Taylor for a really, really long time. They are very different in their styles, but they're very unique in the way that they approach the game. Did you notice a change in your style when you were partnering with either one of them?
Well, just the way we would do games. Chief actually started broadcasting back in the 70s. And so he worked with longtime legendary Hall of Fame broadcaster Gene Hart for the Flyer games for, I think they were together about 18 years. And the style of play-by-play back then was, when the play is on, the play-by-play guy is calling the action. And when the whistle blows, that's when the color guy comes in. There wasn't a lot of blending commentary from the color announcer or color analyst during play like you see now. And so Chief had a difficult time. He wanted to jump in during the play sometimes, and I would give him room to do that. But he never really felt comfortable doing it. So I think a lot of times he'd stay out of interrupting play-by-play or while the play was on to come in with a comment or two. Brian, obviously, as I mentioned, coming through network television, where the balance between the color announcer and the play-by-play guy is probably 60% color announcer, 40% play-by-play. He's quite comfortable jumping in there. So I had a little adjustment. I think when we both started working together, we were both trying to leave each other room, trying to make sure the other guy was comfortable. And then I think fairly quickly, Brian and I had worked some games for NBC and Versus together. So we knew each other's styles a little bit, but it didn't take long for us to, I think, mesh for the viewers, just working together doing the Lightning games.
Speaking of those games that you did on NBC, obviously calling a game on Fox Sports and for the Lightning versus calling national games can be very different. What were the biggest differences for you doing those national versus Lightning broadcasts? And did you enjoy one of them more than the other?
Well, I enjoyed neutral national broadcasts. For example, it was just something was mentioned in talking to somebody the other day, the 2013 Stanley Cup playoffs. It's probably the year I had most of, or I would say the biggest workload of Stanley Cup playoff games not involving the Lightning. And in fact, I think Brian and I worked at least a couple of games during those playoffs. We had an Ottawa-Pittsburgh game in Ottawa and Minnesota-Chicago game, I think we had done. And so I was jumping around from series to series for the first two rounds. The Lightning missed the playoffs that year, so I was available and really enjoyed that, because, it's more homework because you really have to get up to speed on both teams. But I didn't have to worry about, okay, I can't sound like a homer. I can't lean toward the Lightning here, even though they're playing the Bruins and maybe some, high profile team. I think I was most comfortable doing those. I had a Lightning game that was on NBC, for example. Those were a little bit nerve-wracking because you wanted to make sure you didn't sound like a homer, and you couldn't go way overboard for a Stamkos one-timer from the left circle on the power play and then not get as excited for Patrick Kane with a dazzling goal that he might score later in the game. So that was a kind of a difficult thing. Once again, it's the audience. It's Chicago fans, it's Lightning fans, it's neutral fans from various parts of the country. You have to be aware of your audience and in trying to please them with your call.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the complaints that you see right now is that, even though these broadcasters on NBC are national broadcasters, you see people from both sides talking about, oh, they're biased against my team, they're biased for the other team, when they really are trying to make sure, as you said, that they are as neutral as possible, and they can't be 100% for one team at all times.
It's something where people you have such a comfort level with your own broadcasters, and they're able to effortlessly weave in little facts or maybe a similar play that they just witnessed that happened 2 years ago. The national broadcasters just don't have that depth of knowledge of this person's home team that when they judge a national broadcaster who, quite naturally is not as familiar with their team.
Yeah, so, again, you have not been necessarily in the booth this season. You are doing a couple of morning skates. We've seen you on that program. But back when you were every day in the booth with either Brian or with the Chief, can you take us through maybe a day in the life of Rick Peckham, a game day in the life of Rick Peckham?
Well, for example, the last couple of seasons, you mentioned the morning skate show, and that became kind of a staple of our schedule in that Fox Sports Sun would produce a show with the Lightning game production staff, which did an excellent job. They didn't necessarily have a lot of broadcast TV experience, but they put together a heck of a show. And we would have that from 11 o'clock to 11:30 the morning of every home game. And during that time, the team was on the ice behind us. Visitors would come on behind us. Kaylee Chelios, who was a reporter for Tampa Bay Lightning.com and actually filled in, did some color on the radio in the past couple of seasons, would have an interview. She'd have the latest line combinations, the latest news that we were allowed to release in regards to injuries and lineup changes. It was great that we could do that. Occasionally we'd have a guest from the visiting team or something like that. So, you know, there was a certain amount of production that would start the day before to get ready for that. It would also work hand in hand, I guess, in your preparation for that broadcast that night. But it was something that not all broadcasters were doing elsewhere around the league. But really hone in on the press notes in the afternoon in trying to, and I've had a couple of people look at my sheet of notes for a particular game, and they'd say, "How on earth can you read this stuff?" And because I'd be, you know, writing in very small print and putting things here and there, and how do you find that stuff? And what I would do in the time before the game is try to memorize those facts and figures as best as I could, because if you guys are doing live events, whether it's hockey or whatever, you know that you don't always have time to look down, find your notes, and yeah, they've won 4 in a row on Tuesdays or something like that. You pretty much have to have it up here and ready to go at the appropriate time, because if you're looking around for it, that time's going to come and go, and you know, it's not really germane anymore to the broadcast. So I spent a lot of time with notes and facts and figures and trying to internalize them, and you know, just working out what I need to. I also used not necessarily the day of the game, but the day before, night before, is look at some video. I'll tape a previous game of the opponent just so I'd get a look at what they look like, maybe their line combinations, but to be able to identify players on the screen, you know, with their numbers and maybe skating style or their left or right hand shots, that kind of thing. Anything that's going to help me pick players out of a crowded mob of players in front of the net or in the corner or something like that, kind of just to be more accurate with the play-by-play.
I learned about that the hard way because I was doing a broadcast. It wasn't live, but it was recorded. And, you know, I know the Tampa Bay Lightning very well, as I'm a very big fan of that team. But then I quickly realized that you really do have to memorize those players, because hockey especially is one of the fastest moving sports that there is. You know, you look down at your paper to figure out who that player is, or that note, as you were talking about. Next thing you know, the puck's been across 3 other players. So you really do not have much time. So, you know, I know it's a very, very difficult job to do. But I want to talk about, you know, when it comes to one particular player, you've had some pretty memorable calls with this specific player, and that's Braden Point. One of my favorites with Point was his OT winner against the Panthers. I was wondering if you could walk us through that call, if you remember it, because one of my favorite parts about that was after the goal, when you started saying Braden Point's name, your voice and excitement level just went through the roof. It was something we had never heard before. It's one of my favorite calls of all time. So take us through that call if you can.
Well, it seemed that Braden's always coming up with a big goal against them, and it's usually in overtime or a winner late in the game and the closing seconds of the game. And I think I know the one you're talking about. It's where he got the puck alone in front and had time to deke left and right, fake the goalie out of position before he scored it. And I just think that his presence in that moment, you know, obviously no panic. Braden Point would never panic, but just the calmness and the skill level, the combination of those two things just allowed him to just really hang the goalie out to dry in a situation that seemed as natural as a little, you know, byplay during a practice or something like that. But this was with the game on the line. And I was just blown away by how he was able to do that and how easily he made it look. Obviously he's one of my favorite players from what he's done on the ice. And just as a young man, he's just a tremendous guy and ever so polite with everyone he meets that you're just so happy for him. So to see him succeed and the fact that he's been so clutch was just another moment. And I think that skill level really launched me on that call on that particular occasion.
Yeah, so, speaking of Braden Point goal calls, the other one that really springs to mind for a lot of Lightning fans is Game Five's OT winner against the Blue Jackets last year. And it also happened to be your last call um, of your career, basically. Unless, you decide to come back for a guest appearance, we'd love to hear you in the booth again. But at this moment, it's your last call. You know, was there a feeling with you that if this game is over and the Lightning win, this is going to be my last game? I might as well make that call the best it can be, or was it a situation where you're just saying, all right, let's just see how the game plays out?
Well, I was fighting a feeling all day, and it was an afternoon game. So it was kind of a short day in terms of preparation, get to the rink and all of that. But all day long, I couldn't ignore the fact that I knew it could be my last game. This being Game 5, it wasn't a Game 7 situation, but felt very confident the Lightning could win this game. So you kind of had that in the back of your mind all through it. Then it gets to overtime, and you really know that this could be it. I mean, if the Lightning win this game, your career is over. And you're just hoping for what we would call a clean goal, something where it's obvious who scores it. As it turned out, it couldn't be more dramatic than what happened with Kucherov's pass to Point. Once again, great deke out in front of the goal and easily puts it into the net. And it was just put on a tee for me as terms of just calling that game in that goal. But, calling hockey off the monitor, I'd done it a little bit, not very much. I'd done other sports off a monitor. But as you know from watching games on TV, a shot from the point through traffic ends up in the net, and it's anybody's guess whether it hit somebody, defender or another offensive player, and deflected it in. You got to call somebody scoring it. The Lightning recently with the last tenth of a second goal by Victor Hedman, where it looked like it's Hedman's goal. They find out later it hits Alex Killorn, who's screening the goalie. You just didn't want to have a play like that in that situation. You just wanted a clean goal where it was obvious how the puck went in and who put it in the net. And so you could just, go with the moment. And that's exactly what I did. And you're able to summarize and, the fact that ends the series and the Lightning move on. We happen to cut to a shot of John Cooper on the telecast. I think in a lot of the replays of that goal, that shot isn't there. So I'm immediately saying, and John Cooper and the Lightning move on. And somebody might be saying, well, why is he referring to John Cooper? At that moment, we had cut to a shot of Cooper celebrating on the bench. And, you're just going with the pictures at that point, describing what you're seeing. And that's how that unfolded. But it's funny. I have not run into a lot of players since obviously the end of that series, but more than that, since they won the cup. But when they came back, there was a big celebration at Amalie Arena the first night. The next night was the boat parade. But that first night, I was waiting kind of in the hallway as you would expect, maybe backstage or something. And they're waiting to go on. And what was going to transpire there was each guy was going to be able to, in front of sponsors and season ticket members inside Amalie Arena, skate around carrying the Stanley Cup in front of fans, in front of a home crowd, which they obviously couldn't do in Edmonton. And I just happened to see Braden Point and, was able to congratulate him and everything else. And I thanked him for scoring that goal and scoring it the way that he did, because it really made a huge moment for me. And I was very fortunate to have that.
That is an awesome moment. I'm so glad that Braden Point was able to score that goal too. It really exercised some demons for some fans after the way that the year before had ended. But, I want to backtrack a little bit to what you had talked about previously. You did a lot of NBC coverage and versus coverage in the early part of the 2010s and the late part of the 2000s. You mentioned you were with Brian. I recently actually just rewatched the Pittsburgh Ottawa game that you were mentioning. You also did the uh, series, I believe, with Arizona in their Cinderella run in 2012. What happened to Rick Peckham, the playoff NBC announcer? Like, you were, as a lot of people would say in the national circle, probably one of the best to do it in the national circle. So, what changed in terms of maybe a want to do those games, or it was a decision made by somebody else?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for the kind words. A lot of the games that I did for Versus in, say, '07, '08, '09, 2010, didn't do any in 2011 because the Lightning were in the playoffs that year. And then, of course, they missed in 12 and 13 and then started their run of playoff appearances, in every year except for 2017. And so a lot of the decision on who gets called to do games uh, is on who's available. And they're trying to fill spots to cover 8 series in the first round and then, on down from there. So I was available because the team wasn't in the playoffs. So I guess I was a beneficiary of the team not having a good season in terms of being available for NBC to hire me. And, there were a couple of years where they could have included me, but, they didn't want to. Now they've got some favorites there that, Kenny Albert's local there in New York. They're doing a lot of games right now from a studio. Brendan Burke's an outstanding young announcer with the Islanders, and he's right there, as is Kenny. John Forsland has done a ton of work for them and a ton of traveling for them. And he had it in his deal that he could, miss a Hurricanes game to go do an NBC game. I didn't have that freedom. I didn't seek that freedom. And so it was an understanding where if I were free and they needed me for a game, and a couple of occasions where it was a tight fit in terms of the schedule, that did happen. But I think after the Lightning started to make the playoffs consistently in 2014, my availability to NBC, just kind of dropped off.
Well, they definitely missed out for you when you're able to come over there because we really enjoyed all of your calls. Obviously, just a few more questions for you. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time and talking with us. You've only been out of the broadcast booth for a little while now, but I wanted to know: is there something that you've really missed from doing games, or are you enjoying just hanging out and going to the Amalie Arena and be able to watch as a fan?
Well, the exciting moments, like that game in Chicago where a Hedman shot gets deflected in with less than a tenth of a second to go. I mean, those are moments that as a broadcaster, you live for the opportunity to describe those. So, there might be a little twinge at that point, but I'm very comfortable with the decision that I made and the timing of it, and really enjoy watching the games and the pregame show, postgame show that when I'm broadcasting, I certainly don't have a chance to watch. I do tape and have taped through the years for my own edification in terms of trying to avoid mistakes and learn the other team and that kind of thing. And also appreciate how well the Lightning are playing. As you guys know, if you're doing play-by-play and if it's hockey, you got to follow the puck. You miss a lot of things away from the puck that maybe you don't appreciate a play that Anthony Cirelli made, and coming back on a back check or something like that. So if you watch games again, you can kind of just get a second look at the team as a whole and some plays away from the puck. So I would do that, but I wouldn't necessarily pay attention to the pregame, postgame all that much. Now I get to sit at home and watch right on through. I've been able to go to a couple of games, sit in the press box, and I could tell you guys that in those early season games with no fans in the building, NHL hockey was boring because there just was no atmosphere. And I give the players a lot of credit because you could tell the intensity was still there. And they still were very focused on the competition, on their job, and everything else. I give them a lot of credit for being able to maintain that Now I really think they're really going to enjoy having fans back in the building. The couple of games I went to in the last week with 500 fans allowed in the games, there was a bit of an atmosphere that kind of had us sitting on the same side of the ice anyway. We were socially distanced, but it was great to watch the games down low. That's another thing that I kind of take for granted, and a lot of us probably do, is we watch games from the press box 200 feet away. It's a much slower game than when you're in the stands in the lower concourse. You get a better appreciation for how fast the action is, how great these guys are as athletes, and the agility and the decision making is just split second, and their ability to turn on skates and the incredible balance they have, as well as the hand-eye coordination. It really gives you a chance to appreciate that. So having that chance to see that, I've been a huge fan. And the only thing I was telling somebody walking out of the building the other night was they had a tight game. I guess it was against Carolina. And, you're nervous. Whereas a broadcaster, professionally, you're not really allowing yourself to be that nervous. You've got to describe the game. That's your job. But as a fan, it's like, this is gut wrenching here. These last 2 minutes, that's a lot of work, a little more work than maybe I thought it would be, but I'm enjoying it.
Trust me, as a fan of the Tampa Bay Lightning for so many years, I know it does. It gets very stressful down there. But I mentioning with the players and how the atmosphere was different, I think that was really tough for broadcasters as well. Not be able to feed off that crowd enthusiasm. Can't get English out, but because I actually was able to broadcast the game last night, talking about the Victor Hedman goal. That was such a fun one to do as well, because as I did it it was such a fun goal to call. So that was really exciting. So I have one last question for you. You mentioned you're watching the games now a little bit more, and you're there with the fans inside the arena. Do you have any predictions for the Tampa Bay Lightning in this season? Do you think they're going to be able to pull off what is so rare in the NHL and pull off a back-to-back Stanley Cup win?
Well, so far, and we've seen 21 games, the challenges they face, they've been able to rise to the occasion, which, you would expect a defending champion to do, and they have done. A couple of injuries. They got through the Cirelli injury, and Chernak missing a few games. Obviously, they're missing Nikita Kucherov this whole time, and will for the rest of the regular season. And it's not like we don't need him. They have just found different ways to do things. You notice a lot of 2-0, 3-0 games, 2-1 games, 3-2 games. They figured out how to win those games, obviously, on the path to winning the Cup last year in the bubble, especially, but also along the way before the pause. But all of that experience is really paying off for them. I think they've got a very strong chance of repeating, especially if Vasilevsky can stay healthy. But the odd twist of this whole season, it's not just that it's 56 games in the regular season versus 82. It's that they're only playing these teams in their division. Toronto is dominant in that North Division. Boston looks surprisingly strong, even though they lost Chara and some other people, and they don't look that deep as a team on paper. But hey, they're doing just fine in the East Division. And so you're seeing these teams, and the Lightning won't get a chance to play any of them until the semifinals of the playoffs. So every one of these big teams has got the same challenge. Can you focus on a different opponent who you haven't seen all year? It's almost like 2 Stanley Cup finals, the semifinals and the finals, in terms of who you're playing, and the fact that you really don't have a good book on them, because in this case, you haven't seen them at all. So it's difficult to project them as the best team in the league when you haven't seen them play the Leafs, or you haven't seen them play Vegas or another team like that. But I can't see that anyone's stronger than the Tampa Bay Lightning right now, and they know how to go about and accomplish their business. So I give them every opportunity to win the Cup, provided that they're not devastated by injuries or something.
They are definitely playing some of their best hockey right now, and we are enjoying it. So that's going to do it for us, guys, in this episode of Thunderstruck. Rick Peckham, thank you so much for coming out and joining us. We really, really do appreciate it. If you guys did enjoy this episode, please be sure to leave a like down below. It lets us know that you're enjoying it and you want to see more episodes just like that. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications so you don't miss out on more content just like this. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. But most importantly, remember, your Tampa Bay Lightning are your defending Stanley Cup champions.